Hello, everyone, and welcome to Lunch Break Science. It's great to be back after our September break with a stellar new lineup of Leakey Foundation scientists. I'm Ariel Johnson with the Leakey Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to supporting human evolution research and sharing discoveries in programs like this. We want to thank Ann and Gordon Getty and Camilla and George Smith, whose generous support has made this episode of Lunch Break Science possible. Here with us today is 2018 Leakey Foundation grant recipient, Dr. Rachel Bynoe. Rachel, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for inviting me.
Rachel is joining us from Southampton in the United Kingdom, where she is a lecturer at the University of Southampton and studies submerged landscapes. Today, she will be discussing her work exploring a submerged Paleolithic site off the coast of the UK in the North Sea. Before we get started, though, for those of you joining us on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and Leakey Foundation Live, you can submit questions for Rachel at any time during the episode, and she will loop back to them at the end and answer as many of them as you can. Get those questions in early. The earlier you get them in, the more likely Rachel will be able to answer them live here today. My first question for you is, so you are a Paleolithic maritime archaeologist. Yeah. What exactly does that mean?
Okay, so good question. It's a bit of an odd one, I suppose. So Paleolithic obviously means early Stone Age stuff. So I'm interested in human origins broadly. And I look at stone tools and things like Pleistocene faunal remains, so the bones of Pleistocene mammals. The maritime one is the weird one. So I think people generally think of maritime and they think of shipwrecks, right? But for me, my maritime interest is submerged landscapes, like you said. So the landscapes that we see around us today were not the same in the past. So our ancestors, our hominin ancestors, would have lived in dramatically different landscapes. And lots of those have since been submerged by sea level changes. And so for me, one of my main interests is trying to locate and understand those submerged landscapes.
How did you end up pursuing this area of research? Was it the Paleolithic, the maritime, or the archaeology?
So it was the Paleolithic. The archaeology was a falling into affair. That was a weird one. But yeah, Paleolithic initially, I think I was in my second year as an undergrad when I read a paper, and it was a really dense paper. Or it's quite geeky. About kind of the joining up of river systems and loads of evidence and stuff about when we had access, or when hominins would have had access to Britain from Europe. So when the North Sea was dry, this was the first time I had realized that submerged landscapes existed. And it was, I was just completely blown away by the fact that underneath the water are these previous landscapes, or that they used to be at least previous landscapes down there. So I started to try to study it. For my undergrad, I couldn't. For my master's at Southampton, though, I started to sit in on some maritime modules. And I met some people there who I ended up doing my PhD with, who are now colleagues. And yes, so I focused on these submerged landscapes in the North Sea for my PhD research, and it all kind of went from there.
That's so awesome. Why are submerged landscapes so important to understanding our history?
It's a good question. So I have some slides. So I'm going to try and share my screen, see if after a whole semester of online teaching, I can manage this really difficult. All right, so 1 second. I'm just on the wrong slide. Okay, right. So can you see that map?
Yes, we can.
Cool. Okay, so this is obviously a map of the world. And this is a reconstruction of around 26,000 years ago. So this is roughly the height of the last glacial maximum. At this point, sea levels were at their lowest. So they're about 120 meters below where they are today. And at this point, you can see the exposure of landscapes when we have very low sea levels. So all of the red bits are areas that are sea today, but then would have been land. So all of these red areas through time have the potential to have been exposed as landscapes for the hominins who were moving through those areas at the time. And so you can see from this that they're pretty significant, right? There's loads of it everywhere. It's also a global phenomenon. And I think it's really significant for me because as archaeologists, we're very used to dealing with fragmentary information, right? So we find sites and everything is like tiny bits and pieces that we're trying to piece together and link into other sites. But these areas are very specific. So they relate to coastlines, to near coastal areas, to lowlands, the areas that are easily submerged. And so if we don't include these in our interpretations, then we are missing a significant part of one particular type of landscape, which obviously can bias our interpretation. So for me, that's incredibly significant. And if we think about where I work, so can you see the cursor on the screen?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, cool. Okay, so I'm up here in Britain, and the North Sea is just. I'm going to zoom in. It's a bit fuzzy. I apologise. So again, red bits submerged, or the maximum amount of submergence of exposure, when sea levels drop. But because we're up here, we're really at the peripheries of the hominin world during the Paleolithic. It's seasonal. It's not very nice. So what were they doing up here? And how did they get here? And why were they here? And these big questions are really important to answer, I think. And some people have hypothesized that potentially these near coastal environments, these lowland landscapes with these big river systems crossing them, would have been quite resource rich. And it's that would have facilitated this occupation. So it's those kind of questions that I'm interested in, and the reasons why I think it's so significant.
So your site, which is off the coast of Happisburgh, and that was part of the project that you received your Leakey Foundation grant for. What is the significance of that particular site?
Yeah, okay, cool. So Happisburgh, well pronounced, not spelled that way. It's on the coast of Norfolk, so it is right here on the coast, right? So my next slide shows a very simple, sorry, it's terrible, map of a kind of idea of what the sea levels would have been like about 500,000 to about 1 million years ago. So all of the green would have been dry land, and the blue is obviously the sea. And the grey areas show you the outline of the landscape as we know it today. So this is England over here, and this is the edge of Europe just here. And Happisburgh, along the coast at Happisburgh, we have this chromophorous bed formation, which is incredibly unique because it spans a period of time from about 500,000 back to about 1.5 million years. It's really organic rich. And it's given us these two incredible sites at Happisburgh. So one is about 500,000 years ago, but the other one, site Happisburgh 3, this site is dated to nearly 1 million years old. And that's incredible for these northerly latitudes. It's the oldest site in Northern Europe. And it's pushed back our understanding of the timing of occupation by hundreds of thousands of years. But although we're always after the earliest in archaeology, that's not the only reason why this is important. So it's also about the nature of that occupation. So it's associated with a really simple cornflake toolkit, but also from the paleoenvironmental evidence, we know that the landscape and the environment rather was incredibly harsh. So the winters were down to like -6 degrees, and there would have been snow cover. So how and why people were here at this early date is a massive question, right? We also know from this incredible footprint evidence, these again are the earliest footprints outside Africa, and they exist on the same levels as the site. And these include not just those footprints of potentially very mobile hunter-gatherer groups, but also children. So if we think that there are children there, then we must also think about pregnant women. And so we know that these migrations, these dispersals, wouldn't have been rapid. They're not shooting up from the Mediterranean and shooting back down again when winter comes. They're here on a much kind of slower basis, much more, I don't want to say permanent, but a longer time frame. And so can or do these landscapes, these resource-rich lowland near coastal landscapes, provide them with the necessary resources to survive? And is that why they're here? And Happisburgh is incredibly important because it's actually started to give us glimpses that these submerged landscapes do in fact exist off the coast. And we're getting this through the amazing work of some of the local collectors who we've been working with, who are collecting tons of stuff. So faunal remains, so the bones of animals that have been coming up for over 100 years. But more recently, in about 10 years ago, they started to find stone tools as well. So you can see hand axes, cores and flakes, and it's working with them and their GPS points of all these material and analysis of these that I'm using to try to pinpoint areas offshore to try to find these deposits, find this archaeology, and start to answer some of those questions.
That is so exciting. And it must be absolutely just so intense and thrilling to excavate an underwater site. What is a day in the life of an underwater archaeologist like? Is it very different than on-land archaeology?
Yeah. Well, okay, so I think in principle, it's not, I don't think, so much, a bit wetter. A
little bit.
Yeah, a little bit. So obviously you have the natural constraints, right? We can't breathe underwater. So we need to be able to carry the gas on our backs for breathing. And also we're constrained by how many tanks we can fit on the boat. We're constrained by the things like the tides. So if the tides are really strong, then you might have to sit on the boat for 4 hours, maybe more, and wait till they drop off and you can get in. We're really lucky at Happisburgh because we dive between about 2 meters, really shallow, and 15 to 20 meters, but normally around 6. And that means that our gas lasts quite a long time because the deeper you go, the quicker you breathe, or the more you breathe, really. Also means you don't need to worry about decompression, which is fantastic. Also, if we dive on smaller tides, we can go throughout the day. So that's brilliant. It means we can get quite a lot of work done. Methods-wise, so I suppose for me it's the same, because if you were doing terrestrial work, you'd probably do walkover surveys or field walking. We do the same, we just swim it. Okay, so you might do things like drift dives. So if you have a current, you can drop in and then you just drift with the current. And when you see interesting things, you mark it with a marker buoy to the surface so you can return to them with no current. Or we do things like circular searches, so you drop an anchor down or a shot and you do measure out circular distances and swim, so you can cover lots of ground and essentially field walk the seabed. So in that sense, yeah, it's the same kind of thing. And once you find stuff, you do survey it, you measure extent, sample, possibly excavate, all those same kinds of things. I think I have a video of some of my divers doing some of that kind of stuff. So these are some of the deposits at Happisburgh, the laminated deposits. And you can see in a second, one of my colleagues, Crystal Safadi, and she's taking a sample through the seabed. And we then migrated into using drain pipes to get more sediment samples from some of the deposits there. So you can see that you do the same kinds of stuff, right? So on land, we probably use more equipment, which would make it a lot easier than trying to dig it out, which is a nightmare. But we can do the same kind of work. However, of course, it's a very dynamic environment. So sometimes you have sand waves that can come in from year to year and just cover your site. So you can have another video, the same kind of thing. So this might make you feel sick, I apologize. So you can see these huge sand waves. So about a year or two before, this was in situ concreted stuff down here that we wanted to return to look at. But just completely covered by sand, so you can see nothing. So I'm going to return to this in my talk to talk about some of the ways that we can get around this rather annoying coverage of sand that you can't see through. But I also just wanted to show you the amazing conditions there. So both of those were really brilliant visibility in the North Sea. We don't normally get this. And I have a third video just to show you sometimes what we have to deal with. This can make working almost impossible. So it's pitch black, basically. And when the torch goes, and even when the torch is there, if you have your hands in front of your face, you see nothing because it's just full of sediment. And in these situations, working is, well, as you can imagine, pretty difficult, right? You're basically doing archaeology by touch. That's absolutely not ideal. And often, I mean, I've had my hand pinched by crabs underwater when I couldn't see them, which is horrific. But it's, it's doable. And normally it's not that bad, but we have a range of conditions that we just have to work around, I suppose.
How big is your team on average?
So the boat that we use to get into the shallower areas is 7 plus, including a skipper, so 6 of us. And I have the same kind of people out most of the time, but I do try to include students if we have more time. So it's quite small. But, yeah.
Well, this was a really fascinating introduction to the world of Paleolithic maritime archaeology. Yes, it does seem that the phrase of the day is Paleolithic maritime archaeology. So let's turn the virtual floor over to you, Rachel, to dive deeper into learning more about your research.
Brilliant. So I'm going to share my screen again, if I can. It's on the right slide this time. Amazing. Okay, so I think I finished off here. Hang on, it's not going big. There we go.
Oh, there we go.
You can see that? Great.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So yeah, so I've been working with the collectors and my colleagues at the Natural History Museum for the Faunal Remains and the British Museum for the Lithics to analyse these to pinpoint some high potential areas that we can start diving on. And it was this that the Leakey Foundation was funding. So if you look at this this map of Happisburgh here, so the white area is all sea, by the way. Site 3 is up here, that's the million or so year one. Site 1, 500,000 down here. Sediment transport direction is overwhelmingly shore parallel and it's working down towards the southeast. There were two main areas that gave us interesting insights into where we might start looking. And we did this through looking at things like the densities of the finds that were coming up, but also things like their conditions, so how abraded the lithics were and whether they looked like they were incredibly fresh or whether they'd been transported, things like the standardization of the size classes as well, to think about transport. So one of the first areas was up near Site 1, up here. Okay, so over the area of Site 1, literally over the deposits, we were finding that they were picking up lots of very fresh cores and flakes, right? So the assumption is that these are probably deriving from that site. However, to the southeast of that, there was this separate area that was always coming up. And the stuff here was more abraded and again, more standardized. So the hypothesis was that this is coming from just offshore here. So sediment transport going down that way and things are basically just washing out from somewhere up here and coming onto the beach, possibly even associated with those same channel deposits that were giving us Site 1. But for me, the most important area or the most exciting area is down this way. Okay, so down here in Eccles North Gap, I've lost my thing, here we go. There are these shore parallel sea defences, and that means you get the accumulation of sand, and you can see that in this zoom in here. And backed up against this, they were finding tons of stone tools. This is like 70% of the stone tools that we were finding were coming from this area. And I think that was out of about 500 or so that I looked at for the analysis. There's tons more now. So the interesting thing here is that we know south of Site 1, there are no chromoporous bed deposits known at all. We've never found any on the beach. Nothing has come up in boreholes. So where is this stuff coming from? We thought perhaps it's washing down from these sites, but it's not abraded enough to have moved that kind of a distance. There's also a lot of sea defences, and they're very active in this area between. So it would be quite difficult for them to migrate all the way down here. And also we'd expect to find stuff in between, and you don't really find anything. So again, the working hypothesis here was that these were washing in from underwater. Okay, so probably from the nearshore zone just to the northwest. With the sediment transport, they'd kind of come down this way, get caught up in the accumulation of sand and be brought on shore. And this is supported by this time step bathymetry. So this is basically like taking the height of the seabed in one year and looking at the difference between that and another year. And this shows that in the area just to the northwest, sorry, the north arrow has changed, so it's horizontal now. In this area, they had net loss, and this was during and just before when they started to find the archaeology. So this seemed really good. So I was really sure that we could go in here and we'd start to find all of this amazing archaeology. And these were the areas that I wanted to go ground truth with the Leakey funding. And so you can see our boat here. So it's quite small, but it's brilliant, gets us quickly into very shallow and further out areas. And some members of my team doing some things like filling tanks in the evenings, treat them really well. So first day we went out, and despite knowing from many other sites that you never find what you're looking for, I did lots and lots of dives. So these white spots that you can see down here, that's over the area that I just showed you where you had that sediment drop, right, where we were sure we'd find deposits in archaeology. And all we found was sand and sand and sand and drift dives and circular searches and just sand. And I felt so bad because obviously it's running my first project really, and I felt guilty for my students. It's just so boring. So we headed further to the north to the second area, but the other area, I suppose. And as soon as we dropped in there, we started to find intact Pleistocene deposits. And in total, the first week, we found 3. So we found one really close to shore down here, and we found one about 800 meters out that I'll show you some pictures of in a minute. And one further away that was totally by chance because people had just started to find tons of hand axes and stuff on the beach. So we just went and had a look, found another area of intact deposits. So 3 amazing things. This is an image of the ones further out in the Site 1. So these are an image of, where's my mouse? Here we go, out here. So you've got these laminated deposits, so kind of like silts and sands, and tons of organics. And we have a photogrammetric survey. So this is made up of lots of different images and kind of stitched together to make a 3D model, which is why you get these color bands, because they're kind of different light sources. And this line here is about 17 meters long. So it's a pretty big area, and actually it does go further. It just goes underneath the sands. And in here, there are tons of organics. So this is a piece of wood. This scale is 50 centimeters. This wood is like more than 500,000 years old, and it's huge. Some of the stuff you're getting out of here still has the bark attached, and it's just the preservation is absolutely incredible. And we have these things like these kind of peat blocks as well. So all of this paleoenvironmental evidence can really start to help us piece together what the landscapes were like when these deposits were laid down, potentially at the times that people were living in them. And this was incredibly significant because, I didn't even think we would find anything, to be honest. I was, you assume you're not going to, I suppose. But so deposits by themselves were an incredible thing. And we went back in the second week and we dug some test pits. So this is, again, that same area. These are really close together, but quite different. So here you see the laminations are overlying some really interesting deposits that gave me a vole tooth, which are really important for chronology. So that was really cool. I also like this one because you can see a falling crab. They were always in the way. But we bulk sampled all of these test pits. And we also, as you saw in the video, took those cores through them. And these were taken back for analysis. So we've looked at the pollen, things like ostracods, to try to characterize what was going on. And we know that these areas were estuarine, right? So they're near salt marshes, they're resource rich, they're interglacial. The one to the further north, probably cooling end of an interglacial, but really quite a nice place to be. Getting ahead of myself. But despite the fact this is really exciting and really cool, where is the archaeology still? That's what I really want to find in all of these deposits. And we have found things. Okay, so this is an image of a diver finding an early Pleistocene rhino radius, so one of the bones in the arm. This is a mammoth ulna. This was found by 2 different divers on 2 different days in the same area of seabed, but they refit perfectly. They've obviously been in the sea for a while, they're covered in growth and they're kind of rounded. But what this is telling us is that it's moving quite predictably from where it was eroded out of its deposit, which may help us to kind of backtrack to where it came from. We're also finding very small amounts of lithic. So this is incredibly fresh and a very simple flake, but very similar to the stuff that we're finding in the excavations. But despite all this stuff being really exciting, it's all out of context. So it's loose on the seabed. So we're still looking for those parent deposits. And it's also all up to the north, right? It's all up to those areas that aren't that southerly location. So this area that I was so excited about, I still have absolutely no idea where anything is coming from because it's covered by sand. So when I showed you that image of the sandbanks, which may have made you feel a bit sick, I talked about how we can get around that. And so here we've been using seismics, right? So basically this is sub-bottom geophysical data collection to try to look beneath the sand waves. Essentially, it kind of gives you like a slice through the seabed. So this is the transponder and it gets attached to the side of the rib. And you can see the sea does not look so inviting in this picture. It's quite rough and ready, but we get some really lovely results in the top parts of the sediment. And what we found was that we found brilliant channel systems coming out near site 1, big one there. So kind of expected, but they're further out. So actually, not so expected, as well as further to the north, both site 3 and further up there. So brilliant places that we can go back and start to look at the extent of this formation. But we also found paleochannels down to the south. So this is the bit that I was so excited about. Because finally, we have an idea that there are deposits underwater there that could be yielding this archaeology. I apologise for the images. I've had that kind of lockdown, working from home, lack of software. They're a bit rough. This is up to the north, but B and C shows them examples of those further down to the south, all within that area. So you can see these kind of channel systems here and 2 kind of obvious channels here. So this is looking like a slice through the seabed. At the moment covered in sand, but this is super exciting because it means we've finally got somewhere to target to go and search for that archaeology. So you probably spoke at 1,000,000 miles an hour, but I suppose to sum up, this is really one of the first time we've been able to successfully target such early deposits underwater. And I think this kind of work everywhere is really important, because if we're going to start to engage with those landscapes and bring them into the picture, then we need to be doing this. We need to be searching for them. We need to be going out and working in these conditions. Obviously, from my perspective, I really want to find where all of this stuff is coming from. So the next steps, I would love to go out and spend a month or so just swimming about searching for in situ lithic scatters. But I think clearly going back to those new channel systems in the south where we've never found anything before is really key, because I think that's where the archaeology is coming from. So determining the age, the environments, and potentially if there's archaeology involved. And then really developing these methods so that we can push it further and further offshore into even more unknown environments moving further out in the future, hopefully. So thank you for that whistle-stop tour. I'm going to stop sharing.
Well, thank you so much. That was an amazing talk. Now let's take some questions from the audience. If you are watching live and haven't gotten your question in, be sure to get those questions into the chat right now. Before we get started, though, I have a quick question for you as questions are coming in. Earlier in the episode, we saw a map of all of the areas in the world that have become submerged landscapes.
Oh,
if
yeah.
you could go anywhere and find an archaeological site, where would you want to go?
Oh God, there's so many options. So I think some of the things that I've always found really interesting where I don't work, pretty much anywhere other than obviously, is those questions about dispersals out of Africa, right? So there's modern humans, but also pre-human species or pre-modern human species, looking at some of those corridors and the questions about coastal routes out of Africa. So I think the Red Sea, the Arabian Peninsula, I'd love to go and do some work out there. I think that could be really fruitful. Really exciting. And much
hopefully you'll apply for a Leakey Foundation grant for that research.
Hey.
Yeah. Okay, let's take our first audience question. Okay. What has been the most important discovery found at a submerged landscape site?
Oh, that's a tough one. Okay, let me see. Submerged. So there's not a huge number. Well, okay, so there's a really good one recently that I think I have to talk about. And unfortunately, all of these are more recent. So these are Mesolithic. So it's in the past kind of 10,000 years or so. But there was some recent work done in Australia looking at the kind of some of the early submerged landscapes there where they're starting to find lithics. I think the deposits, this is just going to show my ignorance, 8,000 years, I think. So really cool submerged landscape stuff out there, pushing back kind of understanding those landscapes. We also got a Mesolithic site on the coast of England where they have been finding for 30 years lithic deposits and also worked wood. So again, these submerged landscapes giving brilliant preservation and pushing back our understanding of those kind of techniques by several thousand years. So yeah, those would be two good ones.
Awesome. Let's take our first audience question.
Okay. Hi, George.
What is your current sample size of lithics, and do you have a guess of how many of you might find in the channels?
Cool. Okay, so for that analysis, there were like 474, but I stopped. I had to have a cutoff point when I was doing that. So now I can't give you a number, but it's well into the thousands. So we have those collectors who were prolific, and now more collectors also just finding stuff all the time. So I can't give you a number, but it's well over 1,000. It's ridiculous because they excavated tons of sediment from Happisburgh 3 and found 80 lithics, and we find it. So somewhere, so yes, somewhere is prolific, you know, and I'm hoping it's in those channels. But yeah, something is yielding a lot of stuff.
Awesome. Our next question from the audience is, will your research help us study current climate change?
That's a really interesting and a question that comes up a lot. So I think that we can understand a lot of processes of change from looking at this kind of stuff. So, but the problem I think for me is that obviously the current climate change is anthropogenic, right? So this is what I'm talking about wasn't. But we can understand rates of change, although I think those are far quicker at the moment. So I think the closer in time we get, we can also look at the ways that people dealt with these changes. And I think that's one of the kind of important things. But I would say that that's probably, not to downplay my research, but probably something that's more modern human, you know, and when densities of populations are greater. But we can understand the ways that climate changes through looking at this stuff. But it's not anthropogenic, so it is a different game, I think.
Awesome. Our next question is coming shortly.
Okay. Terrifying.
Are there a lot of researchers doing this type of submerged archaeology?
No, not really, not enough. Increasingly, yes. There are some people doing some amazing work in America, in fact, up in the north, and people working out in Australia and in South America too. It tends to be later Pleistocene rather than the really earlier stuff. So up and coming, loads of some cool stuff from the lower Paleolithic as well, but it's getting there. Like it's gaining traction, but it's a challenge, right? And there's no immediate gain from it. So I think people have put off, go to the shipwrecks. But yeah, it's increasing, but there's not a lot of people.
And you're helping train some of the next ones. So, okay. Yeah. Our next audience question is, please tell a bit about dating the deposits.
Yeah. So there's no absolute dating technique really that we can use. So what happens is you have to, it's almost like a Venn diagram of stuff. So when I talk about the paleo environments helping us date the deposits, that's to do with an understanding of first and last appearance dates of particular species. So for example, if you have a particular species and you know it died out at 1 million years, you know that your deposits must be earlier than that. And you combine that then with things like the known ways that the interglacial might progress in terms of which plants you see. And you might combine that with different types of large mammal species that come in at 1.2 and then die out later. So you kind of restrict it. And then you can use things like paleomag. So paleomagnetics can tell you, again, it's these are quite big things, but the magnetic pole kind of changes right, occasionally. The last time that happened was about just after 800,000 years. So if it's not as it is now, then it predates that. So quite simplistically speaking, you have to draw in all of these different things to try to see how and where they overlap. So it's difficult. So you tend to, which is why Happisburgh is 800,000 or 900,000 years or so, because it hits one of those two interglacials, but you couldn't say which. So that's why we have these big error ranges.
Wonderful. Our next question from the audience is coming up. Is there work being done in
Sunderland?
Thank you.
That is also interesting. So I don't know of any active work, but that might just be showing my ignorance, and that's very, very possible. I know of lots of people interested in working out that way. I have a colleague she's looking at the earliest kind of occupation of Australia, and I know she's interested in like the earliest seafaring across there. But I think most of her work, if she's diving and stuff, probably on the other side. But I know lots of people are kind of interested in that part of the world. But I have to say, I'm not sure if anyone's doing active submerged landscape research there at the moment. But I would love to, if anyone's got any ideas. Much nicer.
Oh, let's see here. We have another question. I have so many questions. Is anyone doing this type of work off of Morocco and Gibraltar?
Yeah, there are teams working. I know of teams working off Gibraltar and have been for a long time. So looking into some of the submerged caves and stuff out there. I think in that kind of situation, I think they're mostly working in kind of cave deposits because you have quite strong erosion and currents. Yes, is the answer. That's a key place, I think. Again, not so sure about the Morocco side, but certainly the Gibraltar side. Yeah, and there are some great books about submerged landscapes of the continental shelf and stuff that have come out that kind of document all of this. So,
yes, you have to, definitely give me those titles and we will share them.
Okay, cool. Yeah.
So if anyone wants to read more about it, they can do so.
Yeah, brilliant.
Do we have any more questions from the audience? Oh, is there work?
Oh, that one came up.
Oh, wait, yeah. Will you expand on how the early Pleistocene chronology of the sites have been determined?
Yeah, sure. So it kind of goes back to what I was talking about with how we overlap things. So we know things are early middle Pleistocene at least because the deposits are overlain by glacial till, and that glacial till dates to just around 500,000 years ago. It's the Angli glaciation, it's massive loading glaciation. And then the early Pleistocene designation. So site 3 is just into the early Pleistocene. So early Pleistocene starts at about 0.78, right? So it's literally kind of late early Pleistocene. That's to do with the appearance of some species of plants, Suga in particular, some pollen that we know goes extinct at about, I think, at the transition. And then there are large mammals that start coming in at 1 million years, and the magnetic polarity is reversed. So we know it's pre-0.78. So it's basically, again, it's all those lines of evidence that overlap to give you this really narrow window between 0.78 and 1, which hits those two interglacials of MIS, I think 21 and 25, 23 and 25. So yeah, it's an overlapping of all of those things, and the knowledge that all of these deposits predate that Anglian glaciation.
We have another question. Where is the dating of your material being done?
So I don't have any material to date at the moment. So the underwater stuff, the pollen and all that, which I assume is what you mean, that's being done at the National Oceanography Centre, but I should say the University of Southampton, part of that, by a colleague, Michael Grant, has been looking at the pollen with Mark Lewis and Sylvia Pegler at the Natural History Museum. And John Whittaker has been looking at ostracods. So a range of people who have experience of working on deposits and evidence of that kind of time period. But yeah, most kind of in-house and a bit out of house.
Okay, I think we have 2 more questions.
Okay.
Do you think maybe the multiple glaciation, although a long time ago, aided in the survival into the record as glaciation is a stable environment for bones?
That's actually a really apt question, because so a lot of glaciations will come in and just, destroy deposits, right? We talk about losing a lot of the record because you have all these multiple glaciations, which is why the Pleistocene record is so fragmentary. But the Anglian, the Happisburgh glaciation was waterling. And what that meant was that rather than completely scraping out these deposits, it capped them. And so it did preserve them. So actually, yes, I mean, the chromophorus bed is preserved by the capping of Anglian till. So yeah, that is part of the reason that we have this record.
So we have one final question.
Okay.
Do we know anything about how destructive the process of landscape submergence might have been to the surface layers?
Yeah, I think this is quite complex, and there's been some work done kind of talking about this, and it really depends on where and the nature of that submergence, right? So if it's high energy and rapid, then yes, it's going to be incredibly destructive. Okay, so but something that's much more low energy isn't going to be. It might cover it slowly. And that depends on, again, the point at which the sea level rise reaches, I suppose, the archaeology. So if you're in the surf zone, when sea level rise is happening, then it's going to be super destructive. But the deeper it gets, the more preserved it is. So if it's already covered up, then it might be okay. But yes, I mean, I think the short answer is there are lots of variables, and the answer will probably be different for every site. But yes, of course, I mean, the nature of submergence is going to... more often than not, I would imagine, be relatively destructive unless things are already covered or it's incredibly low energy.
Well, thank you so much. That is all the time we have for questions today. Rachel, thank you so much for joining us. This was a really fun way to...
Yeah.
So you can visit us at leakeyfoundation.org to learn more about the Leakey Foundation, Rachel Bynoe, and how you can help support research like Rachel's and educational programs like Lunch Break Science. Right now, all donations will be doubled by 2 generous donors, meaning your impact will be doubled. On October 15th, in just 2 weeks from today, we meet Leakey Foundation scientists Meg Crowfoot and Grace Davis to learn about decision-making and leadership in primate societies. Did you miss an episode of Lunch Break Science? Visit Leakey Foundation Live or the Leakey Foundation's YouTube channel to catch up on all our past episodes. Be sure to subscribe to the Leakey Foundation's YouTube channel, follow us on Facebook and Twitter, or sign up for our newsletter to be the first to hear about upcoming episodes and groundbreaking discoveries in human evolution research. Still hungry for science and can't wait until October 15th? Check out the Leakey Foundation's award-winning podcast, Origin Stories, available wherever you listen to podcasts. Leakey Foundation, Lunch Break Science is made possible by the generous support of Ann and Gordon Getty and Camilla and George Smith. Thank you all for taking a break from your day and feeding your brain with the Leakey Foundation. Until next week, stay hungry for knowledge.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.